Why they're hard. Another episode. The biggest risk to your future isn't your competition. It's the distractions you insist on keeping in your life rather than doing the things you know you should be doing but aren't. People delay doing things they don't like for longer than it takes to do them.
There have been so many times in my life where I knew I needed to do something, and then I filled all this extra time not doing that thing. And then the moment I did it, I was like, wow, that took way less time than I thought it was going to take. And not only that, it took way less time than it took me to delay to actually get to this point. And if I had only started with just doing what I was supposed to do, I could have done 4 or 5 other things that I was also supposed to do by this exact same point. And so thinking about it from that perspective, I've tried to eliminate as much time between I think I should do this thing and beginning doing it. And I think you get this positive reinforcement cycle that occurs every time you start. I call it pulling the thread. It's like, I just need to start pulling the thread. And then all of a sudden what feels really unknown becomes very tangible. And you're like, oh, I understand the 6 problems I have to solve to do this big thing. But now I know the problems. And then it feels like you can wrap your arms around it. And then you can start taking it one bite at a time.
This same thing works in reverse as well, that when you put something off, it makes putting it off more mañana.
I used to define power by the distance between thoughts and reality. Meaning, if you think about somebody who's omnipotent, so if God or the God figure would be omnipotent as he thinks things are. So there's zero space between thoughts and reality. And so if we want to be more godlike in our lives, the distance that we can shrink between wanting to do something or thinking something should be done and it being done is a direct indication of our personal power in our lives. And so that has helped me basically think, don't be a powerless bitch. Like, just shrink the gap. And I think that's why a lot of my little like personal hacks of waking up and then trying to shrink the time between when I wake up and when I start working, and shrinking the time between one task and the next task. Like, you don't need to take 30 minutes of getting ready to start working. Like, you can just start working, because as soon as you get into it, you start pulling the thread and you're like, oh, here it is. And all of the time that I was getting ready to work, I was just using up my best brain power time on things that truly don't move the needle at all.
Yeah, I came to call that the productivity rain dance, that you sort of do this weird sacred ritual beforehand. Yeah. And we've spoken about this before, but it's, there are certain things that you can do that will make success or productivity or focus more likely and better. Totally. That doesn't mean that you should disregard them. That over-reliance on them makes a very fragile, unrobust way to get into working.
I would delineate the difference between preparation and routine. And so if I'm preparing for a presentation, for example, I might assemble my notes. I might read some stuff about the audience ahead of time. I might read about whoever's, doing the event and learn more about that. I see that as preparation for the thing, which I still see as work. And I think some people, I made a post about how preparation is like everything. I put a lot into preparation. They're like, oh, see, you have a morning routine. I was like, no, I don't need to stand on one foot and do 17 cold plunges and write 6 affirmations, because none of those things are directly related to the work that I'm going to do. And so for me, if it's basically preparation is just a stage of the work. And so if I need to prepare to work, then that's fine, as long as it's related to the work that I'm going to be doing.
Well, we spoke about this yesterday, the difference between focusing on inputs and focusing on outcomes. Right. Yeah. If you optimize for outcomes, the inputs are always optimized. But if you optimize for inputs, what did I actually get done at the end of the day? So the person that does do the productivity rain dance and it takes ages, and everyone's done this. Everyone's got a blank piece of paper in front of them and they end up washing dishes that they never use. Or, the weirdest tasks become alluring because of that. Focusing on outcomes. When we brought this up, it was perfect because I had a whole thing that I wanted to talk to you about this. So I'm a big proponent of something I call the rule of 100, and I'm not the one who invented this, but it's basically 100 primary actions. So I talk about this within the context of advertising. So you make 100 minutes of content, you do 100 outreach if you're doing outbound, you spend $100 a day on ads, and if you've already spent the money on ads, then you're doing 100 minutes a day of writing ad copy, looking at other people's ads, looking for hooks, and then trying to create more advertisements for your business. And the rule of 100 for most people takes about 4 hours a day-ish. And the thing is that's pure inputs, not output. But I've already taken the time to define what those inputs are that create the outputs. But later on in the book, $100 Million Leads, I talk about the rule of 100 on steroids, which is something that I learned from a guy who owned 13 or 14 really successful gyms. And he called it open to goal. And he said, yeah. He said, my managers work open to goal. And I was like, what does that mean? It's like, so they work open until they hit their goal. And so sometimes that means they hit their goal by noon and they can cut out. Or that means that they have to go from 5 a.m. until midnight that night, because that's how long it took them to hit the goal. And so I've seen this across a lot of high achievers across domains. So like, I'll keep shooting free shots until I hit 100 free shots. I will run until this happens. I will practice my presentation until I do 0 mess ups, right? Or whatever that output is that you want for quality or quantity. And I think that you have to first figure out what the input is that most closely correlates or tracks with the output you want. Mm-hmm. And then you jam as much as you possibly can into inputs. Because if I said, hey, go get me 10 customers,
yeah, exactly. You freeze because it's like, well, what do I do? And so then normally people they skew, like behavior skew. So it's all over the place. It's scattered. It's shotguns, sprays. And then they eventually figure out one thing that works. And then it's like, once you hit that, then you just jam that button as hard as you possibly can. And I think that I've been disproportionately successful in different domains in my life by ruthlessly focusing on one input. I mean, even when I was a kid, when I played video games, it's like if you find a spawn point for zombies right before the end of the level, I would just sit there for like 8 hours and just wait for the troll to come up and just slice him again and get my little diamonds and put it in. And I would just do that for hours because I was like, oh, I got to level up my avatar. But I think I play the game of business the exact same way.
Andy Groves says there are so many people working so hard and achieving so little. And that's the lack of correlation between inputs and outcomes.
Yeah. I think the vast majority of business owners, I come from the business perspective, the vast majority of business owners work a fair amount. They just work on the wrong stuff and they do it the wrong way. And so they get so little for their effort that they wonder when they're at home, empty-handed in bed, why isn't this working when I am working? But if you define work, at least the way I do, which is output. So I define work by output. And in order to get output, it's volume times leverage. So how many times you do the thing times how much you get for each time you do it. And so that is do you work smart or do you work hard? It's you do both. You do as many reps as you possibly can, and you do it with the most leverage possible. So if I make 100 phone calls, the leverage that I can have there would be how skilled I am. So if I make 100 calls, I might get 10 times more. And so I worked more. I had more output than somebody who has less skill. But the only way you get skilled is by doing more inputs, by working more. And so it's this virtuous cycle of doing more and getting better, and then you get more for what you do.
Yeah. Magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding all the time. Every single time that we're not making progress in this way, what is the highest pain task that's in front of me that I've put off the most? It's always that one. It always is. After you spend enough time thinking about work and deconstructing the way that you piece your day and your life together, you sometimes believe that the answer is still out there, and what you actually realize is that you've already learned it. And it's like, it's that quote or that insight or that book. It's one of the first books you read, because all of the big insights from productivity and personal development are the lowest hanging fruit. They're the ones that are repeated across the most books because they're the most reliable, scalable, and robust. It's like, I don't need to be looking out there for most of the new insights. They're just shit that I already learned.
Yeah, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. It's one of my favorites.
Bad things don't come in threes. Bad things happen. People don't know how to cope, and they allow one bad thing to snowball into more. Bad stuff sucks. The only thing worse is letting one bad thing ruin many good things.
I'm glad you found that one. That was one on that list of things that, quotes I wish had gone more viral. The amount of, I think it happens more when you're younger, but, girlfriend breaks up with you. Okay. Then you go into work and you sulk because you're distracted, and then you don't do the same level of effort and you're not enthusiastic. And then all of a sudden your work suffers and you get put on a PIP or you get fired. And then now you're fired and you don't have a girlfriend, and then you start gaining weight and you stop going to the gym. And all of a sudden you're like, man, bad things happen in threes. It's like, no, bad things happen all the time, and they only become interrelated if you let it affect your behavior. And so I think the equal opposite of that is thinking, okay, this bad thing occurred. What can I do to decrease the likelihood something else bad occurs in the meantime? And then boiling everything down to activities or the actions that I have to take. And I think about that actually a lot, which is how, like, if you think about from the power perspective of, okay, something bad happens, how much would it affect my behavior? Well, the person who's indestructible would have something terrible happen and then nothing would change. And I love that.
Or they'd get better.
Exactly, yeah.
That's anti-fragility, right?
Yeah, the sword of Gryffindor. It only drinks in that which makes it stronger.
Fucking Harry Potter reference. Wasn't expecting that. The people don't know how to cope thing, especially with bad stuff, is it does explain why you end up with this weird spiral. Tiny little avalanche pebble at the top, and then this huge sort of over-exaggerated reaction downstream.
Yeah, people don't know how to manage their emotions. I think the more, at least for me, the more I've tried to create space between how I feel and what I do, the more consistent my outcomes have been.
What do you mean?
So if I need to create content and I'm not feeling it, or I'm feeling tired, or things like that, the more times I give into that excuse or that feeling, then the more superstitious I become about doing it in the future. Whereas a lot of times, if I can just start when I am tired or when something is painful, and then still execute about the same as before, I look at game tape, or I look at video, or I look at the content from those sessions, for example, and I see that I remember feeling terrible during the session, but you can't really see anything. And I think the more times you get that loop going, the more you can separate how you feel and what is required. And the more times you do what is required to get what you want, the more times you get what you want.
I spoke to Huberman last year. I think it's called the anterior mid-singular cortex. It's an area of the brain. If I've got that right, fucking yes, bro. The best advert for Newtonic ever. Basically, there is an area of the brain that tracks when you do something that you don't want to do, and you strengthen the connections in it by doing things that you don't want to do, especially when you really don't want to do them. So you're hypertrophying. It's this exact sort of intuition that you've got that some people will call it resilience or willpower or whatever, but this is neurologically represented in the brain. These connections get stronger. So I think it's so funny. Gym bros will need a gym analogy in order to be able to believe that their brain changes. But it's really useful to think, hey, you're hypertrophying this area of your brain. Yeah. I snapped an Achilles. I had to do a very particular series of rehab movements in order to grow it back. This is just the same.
Yeah. Agreed.
Successful people, this is kind of similar to what you were talking about. Bad things don't come in threes. Successful people see opportunity in every failure. Normal people see failure in every opportunity. Both are right. Only one gets rich.
Yeah, so this has been something I've been thinking about a lot, which is basically the shittiness of stuff, which is when you're growing in a business, it's very painful. When you're stagnating in a business and you're plateaued and you don't know what to do, it's very painful. When you're declining and you also don't know what to do, it's very painful. And so that means that all conditions of reality are painful. And so if pain is a prerequisite for reality, then it means it's just a signal that we are alive. And so in thinking about that, rather than pain is a problem, it is a signal that I'm breathing, and then becomes irrelevant.
How do you ensure that you're not suffering unnecessarily? You know, pain can be a useful signal. It can tell you to move away from certain things that are suboptimal.
Yeah. I probably have relatively contrarian views on this. But just even the judgment on pain, I relatively reject. Just like pain is good, pain is bad. I mean, in the gym, to give a gym example, they found that the pain that you experience when you're going to work out, and there's a difference between like massive joint, you're like, oh, I just snapped a muscle, and like just feeling bad. But feeling bad has zero correlation to your performance in the gym. And so I remember reading that for the Olympic, weight teams, they talked about that. And I was like, oh, well, if it has no correlation, then it's almost irrelevant and I can just keep living my life. And so I think the ultimate version of the resilience that you were referencing earlier is rather than, in the beginning, you're like, I feel bad. And then you think that should weigh on the decision of whether you do the thing that you're supposed to do. And then you start realizing that you can do the thing, even though you don't feel good about it. And you start hypertrophying it. But I think the ultimate version of the hypertrophy, when the muscle becomes a tendon or it just becomes fused, is when you don't even consider how you feel. It's just not a thought. You just do it.
That's that movement from sort of type 2 to type 1 thinking, from it being very conscious, very effortful to it's just a reaction. I get up and I start to write.
Right. And you don't use up any willpower.
No, because it's just what you do.
Right.
There's a Rory Sutherland that we were talking about yesterday. He's the only guy that I've ever heard swear in a TED talk. And he gave me this idea, which is kind of related. Things are not what they are. Things are what we think they are. For instance, you're doing a hard workout, which gives you a signature feeling. You're laid on the floor, panting, heart rate at 180, sweating from everywhere with the taste of metal in your mouth. This is oddly enjoyable. But if this exact same sensation was to spontaneously occur in your car while sat in traffic, you'd call an ambulance for fear that you're having a heart attack. Framing is everything. Rory Sutherland says, sometimes you just want to stand in a corner and stare out of the window. The problem is, when you're not smoking and staring out of the window, you're an antisocial, friendless idiot. If you stand and stare out of the window with a cigarette, you're a fucking philosopher. The power of reframing things cannot be overstated. It's significantly easier to find a way to reframe your experiences as enjoyable while you improve them, rather than waiting for them to be done before you give yourself license to be happy.
So a friend of mine, she's a very, very successful therapist. And she always asks her patients when they come to her and say some terrible thing happened. She said, what would it take for this to be amazing? And so, for example, a lady comes, says, we're getting a divorce. And she says, so what would it take for this to be amazing? And so it just completely shifts the reality of like, okay, how could this be an amazing thing that could happen to me? And this is relevant for me, shifting gears, because we just had a big tryout inside of our company for a presentation slot that we have an event. So we had a bunch of the leaders in the company.
There was like the fucking Hunger Games.
Yeah, we put a cash prize
Fight
out.
to the death, pitchforks.
We did. No, we put a big cash prize out there. Oh yeah, I totally did that. I told her, I was like, I'll have no expression.
Just in a toga.
Yeah, exactly. And I could tell that some of them were nervous. And I thought about this because, I speak a fair amount and I don't get a lot of nerves in general. And I have a whole bunch of thoughts on that. But the most basic one is that if you're still feeling anxiety, which many of them were like, hey, I'm so nervous, or hey, I have a lot of anxiety before going up. I thought about it, and champions just interpret anxiety as excitement. And if you're excited to go up, then you're like, I'm amped, versus I'm stressed. But it feels the same. The way you frame it totally changes how you feel when you're stepping on stage. But my 2 cents of, if you are feeling lots of anxiety, it means you need to practice more. That's just my 2 cents. And that comes for everything, whether it's to have a meeting or give a presentation or write an email or do a book. Like if you feel nervous before you release it, then you probably didn't work on it enough. And I think the reality is that most people, to get not anxious about whatever they're doing, you have to do it so many times that by the last time you're doing it, you're bored of it. Like you don't even want to see the thing again. When you're sick of it is the point where you'll have no adrenal response to the stimulus because you've seen it so many times. You could do it in your sleep because you hate it at this point. And then when you get up, you're like, oh my God, let's just do this because I can breathe this thing
over with.
Yeah.
What's the gap between your expectation of what is going to happen and the requirement that you need to perform, right? This is where I need to be, and this is how I think I'm going to perform, as opposed to the other way. So I saw this firsthand when I did the live tour last year. So I did, I think, 17 shows in 28 days, 3 continents, right? Like proper tour, like real proper tour thing. And, I did 4 work in progress shows and then that run all around UK, Ireland, Dubai, Canada, US, Canada again, US again. And I could see, because it was around about every other day for a month. And each time that I stepped out on stage, every single time that even though I'd done the prep, I'd spent all of this time, I'd done the thing, I tried to, I'm not nervous, I'm excited, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Still, that degraded over time until at the end of it. And this is why comedians, I think, when they end up doing really big tours, one of my friends did a 300-day tour of the same show. He said, I no longer felt like a comedian, I was a performer.
Oh, yeah. Because
he's not stepping out on stage. He is so dialed and routinized that he's bored while he does it. And that's how you look at, oh my God, Joe Rogan just did Netflix live to fucking God knows how many millions of people. Metropolitan area of San Antonio's internet probably went down for him to be able to get that connection moving. And how could he do that? All of these people watching and all the rest of it. That set that Joe did, I've seen at the Vulcan Gas Company downtown in Austin, and I've seen it at the Mothership in different iterations for coming up on 3 years now. And his last special was 6 years ago. That guy has said those sentences and waited those times and got those laughs and understood the inflections and the little pauses he needs to do maybe 300 times on that one set. There's no more degrees of free. The only thing that could go wrong is a real quirk mistake that's kind of, to be honest, out of your control. If you misspeak a word when you're paying attention, that's not your fault. That's how people have unbelievable performance ability. It's just a case of stepping there sort of 1 degree of competence at a time.
And if we think of confidence as the percentage likelihood of what we think is going to happen will happen as a predictive metric, then in order to be more confident, we want to have more proof that what we think will happen. And so the easiest way to do that is to do it a lot of times. And so it would be reasonable to say that you're confident that it will go the way you want because it has gone the way you've wanted so many times in a row before.
I've just realized, I've never thought of this before, the fact that the word confidence as in how we describe it from a psychological perspective and confidence is in the interval level that you have numerically are the same fucking word. That's so funny.
Operationalizing. What? How do you become confident? Do it enough times that you feel like it is unlikely that what you think should happen won't happen.
My model of the world is accurate.
I'm confident when I go up to girls. Well, you start going up to girls and you start tanking, and then 1 out of 10 times it goes well, and then you do it another 10 times, and 2 out of 10 times goes well, and then 4 out of 10 times, and then 8 out of 10 times, and all of a sudden you're confident because you have a high degree of predictive power when you say it will go this way.
That's such a good reframing of confidence. And the best part is you get to use the same word.
And you can boil it down to inputs. You just have to do more.